What is up? What is up? What is up with you right now? What is going on? What up? What up? What up? What up? You may ask why I'm so cheerful today, um, considering it is 5:21 in the evening and I'm doing screencasts, which, oh, I got to pretend like I really enjoy doing them, which I do. But, I came home and put on a little Fox Newsito. I wanted a little fair and balanced presentation of the news today. And, well, I just got to show you.
My Jeb impression? No, I don't want to do that. I don't like showing a person sleeping at a podium.
Someone asked Donald Trump. I hope to God the audio was up for that enough so that you could hear it. Someone asked him today at a at a campaign stop to do his Jeb impression. No, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be someone sleeping at a podium. Trump, he never fails to amaze me with his insults. He does say that Jeb Bush is low energy, so I guess people who are low energy might fall asleep at a podium. But the structure and powers of Congress. Again, this is a screencast that is, generally speaking, a review from Unit 1. So a lot of these concepts we've talked about um, a lot. So hopefully this will go quick. You know that what that means. It'll end up being 20 minutes. But the structure and powers of Congress. This is the constitutional powers primarily that Congress is given in the Constitution. As we know, Congress was closest to the people. And I think it's safe to assume that the framers intended Congress to have more power than as opposed to the other two branches in the federal government. And simply looking at the document, the Constitution, we can see that their section, Article 1, is considerably longer than Article 2, the executive, and Article 3, the judiciary. Our Congress is a bicameral structure, as you know, due to the Great Compromise. Shout out to D3 on that one. And one can assume that the framers put this bicameral structure into the Constitution not only to appease the southern states, or excuse me, the smaller states and the larger states, but to make it so that this is a relatively slow and deliberate process. It's not too easy to simply go ahead and pass laws. If you have a change in government, you don't have members automatically changing the other party's laws that have been previously passed. That would not necessarily be good when we're constantly changing public policy due to a change in leadership, which party is in power. Um, I think it's gone to the extreme now to where we are accomplishing very, very little in regards to passing of legislation. And so I don't know if the framers intended to have such partisanship, the Republicans being so Republican and Democrats being so Democrat, and not getting anything accomplished. The House of Representatives originally was supposed to be closer to the people. It was the only part of government that was directly elected. And therefore, there are some powers that they have that the Senate does have, and vice versa. A lot of you today got wrong, and I've emphasized this frequently. The Senate approves. All of the things that the executive branch, specifically the president, passes, the Senate approves. Remember, approve starts with an A. Senate has an A. House, no A. Senate approves. So when we talk about the Senate approving, we're talking about treaties, we're talking about judicial appointments, both to the Supreme Court and the lower courts. We're talking about heads of the bureaucratic agencies under the jellyfish. So when the president heads someone or appoints someone to um, Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, head of the FBI, head of the IRS, the Senate will approve. The House of Representatives plays no role in that process. So please remember that. The Senate, obviously, I've discussed, has far looser, I would say, rules than the House. The House has very strict rules, and that, hence the importance of the Rules Committee in the House. Extremely important committee, and one that individuals would want to get on. And we'll get into committees tomorrow, or I guess, well, maybe tomorrow. So again, bicameralism has a moderating effect. It slows down. It makes it a slow and deliberate process. Things don't happen very, very quickly. It is a slow process, and I suppose it makes sure that when we do pass pieces of legislation, they make sense and they are something that the majority of Americans would agree with. Express or enumerated powers of Congress. So these are in the Constitution. Express mean they're explicit, they're written in the Constitution. Some of them are more important than others. Obviously, the ability to levy taxes or tax the American people is extremely important. Without that, the government, really can't exist. Um, we can probably reason that revenue bills must begin in the House because originally the House was elected by the people. And those individuals would be more maybe reliant on what the people wanted, and therefore they'd be a little more careful in drastically raising taxes on the people, which most Americans do not like. Congress can spend money for common defense, public welfare. Public welfare is anything that the government does, whether you're talking about food stamps or whether you're talking about um, deciding to clean up the environment. Uh, it just encompasses everything the government does. They can borrow money, regulate interstate commerce. That is important. Foreign commerce is important too, and we pass laws that make it a little bit easier to trade with other countries. NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Act, which I think is on your key legislation list, allowed for easier trade between Mexico, the United States, and Canada. There used to be trade barriers, and so Congress passed a law that struck down those trade barriers, and a lot of companies enjoyed that. Ford is building a new huge plant in Mexico City, getting some criticism for that, for taking jobs out of the U.S. and sending them to Mexico. But when you talk about free trade and capitalism, I guess the whole idea is government isn't going to be involved in trade. But interstate commerce is important because the federal government, specifically Congress, can control anything that crosses state lines, and this has drastically increased the power of the federal government, specifically Congress and the executive branch. The two provisions in the Constitution that have given Congress and the executive branch far, far more power than probably was intended is the Elastic Clause and the Interstate Commerce Clause in the Constitution. Naturalization laws are immigration laws. Congress has the ability to pass laws that either increase the amount of immigrants that come into our country every year, may put provisions on it, such as we will accept, and believe you me, if you look at our immigration law, it is very specific. And it even gets down to the point where we accept certain numbers of people from certain areas of the globe. And it's been used in discriminatory ways in the past. Boring, boring, boring. What up, Alexian? Uh, the lower courts to the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court is in the Constitution. The two lower courts, which we'll get into in the last unit, the Court of Appeals and the district courts, are established by Congress. Congress has the ability to declare war, but it's not very explicit in the Constitution what that means. Can the president send troops without a formal declaration? Yes. How does Congress affect that or play a role in that? Power of the purse. If you're going to send troops, you're going to need money. And so when we talked about or looked at the individual member of Congress who was talking in committee to a Marine general in regards to an increase of troops on Guam, in which he said Guam might tip over if there's too many people. Sorry, seventh period as usual. I don't think we got to that with you. Power of the purse. Congress controls how much money goes to the armed forces. So that's a little bit of a way without a formal declaration to affect that policy area. Implied powers are not listed explicitly in the Constitution, but they are implied. And the elastic clause allows for this, also known as the necessary and proper clause. So, for example, if we are going to give Congress the ability to coin money, we are going to give them, it's implied, the ability to start a national bank. You would need some kind of entity. Same thing can be said, Department of the Treasury. We'll put that right on there. Oops. You cannot, tax, or excuse me, you cannot coin money and make money without some kind of government agency or body that will carry that out. So as long as it is tied to one of the enumerated powers, and there's more than just this in the Constitution, then Congress has the ability to do it. Institutional powers, so somewhat related to checks and balances, and when we talk about checks upon itself. Ratification, again, the Senate ratifies with a 2/3 vote. The Senate approves presidential appointments. We talked about that earlier. Impeachment. We talked about that today, I believe, in all 4 classes. Impeachment, removing of individuals in the executive branch for indiscretions or bad things. Now, there's not a list of things. Congress can determine what is bad. They are currently, the House, going through the process of trying to impeach the director of the IRS because that agency, the Internal Revenue Service, has been kind of focusing on individual groups and auditing individual groups like 501c3s and maybe C4s who tend to be more conservative. So there's a charge that they're focusing on conservative groups and giving them a hard time. Senate would then have a trial for impeachment, and you need a supermajority or a 2/3 vote to convict and remove from office. So again, the House impeached Bill Clinton by a majority vote. The Senate was unable to get a supermajority, so he remained in office. Last unit, we talked about the House selecting the president if there's no electoral majority. If you don't get above 270 or above in regards to electoral college votes. That's another role that the House plays. Constitutional amendments, again, start at the federal level with a 2/3 vote. George W. Bush had a Republican Congress and still was unable to have a definition of a marriage amendment. He wanted to define marriage as between a man and a woman. He was unable to convince enough Republicans to get to a 2/3 majority in both chambers of Congress. And of course, they can punish and remove their own members. Doesn't happen often because, well, let's hope there's not a lot of trickery going on in Congress. But yeah, it just doesn't happen. You're not going to remove people who are elected because then it may become, okay, if the Republicans target some Democrats, then the Democrats target some Republicans. Not good. Powers denied to Congress. These 3 things Congress or the federal government cannot do. And we talked about these in Unit 1, and you still need to know them today in Unit 4 and in May when you're taking the test. Congress cannot pass ex post facto laws, which means you are punished for something you did before it was against the law. One area where this is very common is the internet. There were no laws addressing illegal things that you could not do on the internet. And so at some point, as the internet became more common, all of these laws were being passed, such as you cannot solicit a minor on the internet for, sex or sexual behavior. You couldn't punish someone who had done that before it was against the law. So it's ex post facto legislation where someone is punished for doing something previous to it becoming against the law. Congress may not pass bills of attainder, which is punishing someone for a crime without a trial. I don't know why AP is so in love with bills of attainder, but it appears on the test often. Just know that they can't pass a law that punishes you for a crime without some kind of trial. Finally, the most common of these three, or the most reference to these three, especially with court cases, is suspending habeas corpus. So Congress cannot deny habeas corpus. Habeas corpus is the right to know what you are being charged with when you were arrested and detained by the government. And what it says in the Constitution is except in cases of rebellion or invasion. And this is where it becomes very murky or very messy. What the federal government has done is they've detained individuals who they say are tied to terrorism and have not charged them officially with a crime. So they sit in prison. Guantanamo Bay is a military prison, most known for this. They may sit in prison and never be charged. There are people who are at Guantanamo Bay who have been there for years without being formally charged. Because the government says they do not have to provide habeas corpus, knowing what you're being charged with, because they are tied to terrorism, which gets to the rebellion or invasion. So it is a very loose interpretation of what rebellion or invasion means. The federal government makes an argument that these evildoers are tied to terrorism, and therefore they do not have to reveal what evidence they have against them because it might compromise their continuing search to find and detain and get rid of terrorists. So habeas corpus, the right to know what you're being charged with, because you can't proceed to trial until you've been officially charged. So individuals are sitting, some individuals are sitting in prisons, federal prisons, without being charged. You can't go to trial and defend yourself without knowing what the charges are. That's something that in a normal case, like if you got arrested in DuPage County, you would know within usually 24 to 48 hours. With the federal government in suspending or withholding habeas corpus, again, it could be years. And the courts ultimately decide whether the federal government is right in their interpretation of when they can suspend habeas corpus. Hopefully that's helpful. Peace.